Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Mike Matuke and this is my programming series. So today we're going to be looking at libraries, what libraries are, and a bit of an example of how you can use them. So libraries by definition are basically, it's basically code that has been written and can be reused for specific tasks, right? So for example, in our normal use, we have the input and output libraries that we usually have, which allow us to print out values in our terminal. That comes from a library, usually the standard library that comes with your language. So for example, in C++, you have that standard template library, and in Python, you also have that standard library that just has the print function and so on and so forth. So these all pre-written code that we are able to access and reuse for specific purpose. So that's what, in definition, a library can be called. So if we try to look at this in example, we'll see it in both C++ and Python, just small examples of the libraries that we're already using, and also we'll try to see a bit of an example of how you can create a library of your own. Not necessarily up to the point where it's a standalone library, but now a beginning point where you have different files acting as a source for specific functions. So in order to do this examples, I'll also be incorporating some code that we used in our previous video, the multidimensional arrays video. I'll link it up there and so that you can be able to look at it if you haven't already. So let's dive right in and see this in C++. So when you look at C++ here, you can see this is what we had before. We have our class data frame that we are using as an example so that you can create a simple CSV file. So for this, what we'll do, first of all, we can see that up here we have this hashtag include iostream, hashtag include vector, hashtag include fstream. So now these are our first examples of libraries. There's a library called the iostream, which basically comes the standard template library of C++. Same for the vector and fstream. These are libraries that are accessible to us because someone somewhere wrote this code, made it available in the standard template library, and now we are able to reuse this code. And you can see now from these libraries, you are able to access classes, you're able to access functions that have been provided, even variables that have been provided in these libraries. So that's how basically it works. Now, in our case here, we'll try and separate this data frame class into its own separate file so that we see how we usually implement it, right? So what we would do, for those who don't know, in C++ we would have something like a header file. So here I'll just create a new item and I'll call it, let's say this is a data frame. So data frame.h, right? So you can see there's something called pragma1. Pragma1 is basically a directive that, since this is this .h file, it's a header file, that means we'll be able to import it into other files. So what the pragma1 does is, if we've imported it in a file that already has it, it only makes sure that there's only one definition within that file. Okay, so it allows us to only use one definition per file, right? That's what pragma1 does. So let's try to move this data frame into our header file, right? So if we move it here, of course now you see we also need this included. So we need the std vector, std fstream, sorry, hashtag include fstream included here as well, so that we are able to clear out all the errors. And then now when we come to this side, you can see now that we have errors because data frame is not defined, right? So what we do here, we add our hashtag include, which is basically the way we are able to include something from another file or another library. And then we use now the name of the file. You can notice here that I'm using the quotation marks and not the less than and greater than signs. right? This is basically, I usually use this so that you're able to separate between the user defined header files and the pre-existing header files, right? So here we'll just put data frame .h like so. And so now you can see the errors disappear. So basically what this means, we have included all the functionality that is in this data frame right here in this file. So everything that is in the data frame.h we are able to access. And if I run this, you will see that it is able to run correctly, right? No errors appearing. So in this case, we are saving into a file. We are not printing anything. So in this case, let me just make sure I print something so that completed execution. And silly me, I'm using Python code rather than C++ code. So this is how it's actually supposed to be written. Pardon for that. And here, when we run this, you can see that it completed execution. So that's just a basic overview of how it works in C++. We have the header file and we have the CPP file. Of course, this is just an introduction to it. This is not exactly how you'd implement everything when it comes to actual code. We'll do that with examples coming forward, but you can see how now the libraries actually work. We usually have header files that we're able to include and then use them moving forward. Now, let's try and look at this in Python. So in Python, we also have the same example here, the class data frame that we implemented last time, right? So in Python, instead of using hashtag include like we have in C++, what we have is import this. So for example, import OS. That's one of the libraries that comes along with Python, right? The standard libraries. So that's how we will do it. So OS is one that is one library that helps us in doing some operating system operations, such as, for example, listing the directory, for example. So if I just print this basically just prints the files that exist in this current directory, right? So if I run this, you'll see that here it's able to provide a list of everything that exists in this directory. So you can see dataframe.csv, datatypes.txt, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how a library works. It basically helps us access some functions, some classes, some variables that are predefined for our own use. Now, if you were to try and make something similar to a library, in our case, what we would do is now the simple level, like we can move it into another file, right? So we can come here and create a new file, maybe call it my data frame.py, right? And then here we'll have all our data frame code. Then when we come here, then we will import the data frame, right? So import my data frame like so. You don't need to put the .py because it will be accessible from where it is. So I'll just remove that code. Now here, if we try to run this, you'll notice that we have an error occurring, right? So they say module object is not callable. Why? Now, what happens here is we have call import my data frame, which refers to this file. Basically, we've imported everything within this file, but we've not imported this specific class. Basically, what that means is this my data frame is just referring to this environment right here, the environment within this file. So what you would do here is you would add my data frame dot like so that you're able, this refers to the file, and then, or rather the module, and then this will refer now to the exact class that you've defined here. I'll do the same for this to refer to the class. So if I run this now, we'll see that execution is completed. Basically, this has run, right? So Another way you can also do this, you can import my data frame as uh, let's say df module, for example, right? So that what that means is, instead of calling this my data frame, it will call it df module, and so anytime where I'm referring to this, I'll replace that with df module, right? So you can see how this acts as sort of a library, right? How you would import it. Of course, this is not the exact way that you would do it. When you're creating a library, there's some extra steps that you follow, but this is a simplified version of how you can understand how libraries work, right? So another way that you can do this, rather than importing the module, then accessing now the classes within it, what you can do is import exactly what you need. So in this case, we only need this class, my data frame. So what you can say is, from my data frame, import my data frame, right? So my data frame, the first my data frame referring to this module, and then the second my data frame referring to now the class itself, right? So if I remove this now, df module, this time we'll have this working. So if I run this, you can see execution completed, no errors pop out, right? So if in case this my data frame is confusing you, we can decide to change the name of this. Let's change it to, let's say, df.py. So Python will do some changes for us. So you can see from here, we're doing from df, which is the name of the module, import my data frame, right? If you are doing it differently, the way we're doing it the first time, it will be import df, right? And then here, if I remove this, what we'd have is df dot, this is caps, so df dot my data frame, like so, and then here the same for that. So you can see how this works. This file acts as a separate module that can now be imported into another file. So that's basically how the libraries work. So I hope you've gotten to understand how libraries work, how they're used. Of course, we've looked at a simplified version of libraries. This is not the extent of it, but this should be able to get you to understand how they work in general, right? So I hope you've gotten to learn, and I hope to see you next time. Please like, share, and subscribe, and cheers.